Thank you, thank you. Your answers have sounded wonderfully collaborative, and that's of course important. But this is an independent role, and you're there to challenge government and the Home Office on very controversial issues. What experience have you had of being independent from the system and challenging the system?
In that sense, the role I did in the Treasury in leading reviews of major programmes and projects was exactly that. You put together a small team, you were the team leader, you went in as an independent team and as an independent team leader, but at the same time you worked with the people who you were reviewing, inspecting, assessing. And one of the ways that I found was very successful was at the start of each review or inspection, you had a session with the people you were going to work with, and you established the ground rules of how you were going to work. And where, as the reviewer being independent, you would be independent, and what that meant in practice, and how you would work through with the people such that they understood, yes, at times this person is going to be independent, but they at the same time are working with us, so that the end result, you get recommendations which are implementable, are workable, and actually will improve the system. That doesn't stop in any way myself as an independent lead reviewer or inspector saying, I've identified this and this doesn't seem to be working. Not at all. You can do that and you must do that. But it's how you then work it through that's important after that.
What if you get pushback?
You discuss it. You talk about it. And you talk further about it. And again, one of the things I've done in the past is that you establish a modus operandi. If we disagree in the course of this review, how are we going to work it? How are we going to resolve it? Who's going to meet with whom? And you go on discussing it until you see whether you can get a resolution. Now, at the end of the day, you may, as the reviewer and in charge of a review or an inspection team, have to say, well, look, this is my finding at the end of the day, this is what I'm going to say. But I hope you don't get to that. And in my experience, if you establish this, what I call a compact, with the people you're reviewing at the start of the process, so you all can know what to expect from each other, then most times you can find a way through without having to resort to saying, well, we agree to disagree totally and utterly, and I'm going to take this line.
Talking about these are controversial issues, in your experience when you were Secretary to the Archbishop of York during a controversial time with the safeguarding issues, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, that was probably the most challenging stakeholder engagement experience of my life. For 3 years, working with the Archbishop and bishops and those three dioceses who were being brought together into a single entity. And it was vital in that particular role to spend a lot of my time going on one-to-one conversations, discussions with people to understand where they were coming from, why they were concerned. One of the learnings that I took from that particular project was that right from the outset, the case for change had not been properly made. So when I arrived, there were a lot of people still saying, why are we doing this? We don't understand. And so we had to formulate what the case for change was and restate it as part of then working with individuals, often on a one-to-one basis.
But ultimately your boss didn't accept that?
No, he did. The whole proposal was approved by the General Synod.
Oh no, but the Archbishop of York, I mean.
Well, the Archbishop of York was fully in favour of it.
He did, okay, but he didn't accept the findings.
No, this was nothing to do with safeguarding at all. We had no safeguarding issues during the time I was working with the Archbishop of York. This was John Sentamu when he was the Archbishop. This was purely about how did you bring together three dioceses and make them into a single entity after that. The issue with safeguarding didn't rear its head.
I am right, aren't I, that you worked with the Archbishop of York between 2011 and 2014, the end of 2014?
It's about that period, yes.
That's right. Whilst you clearly weren't there when the safeguarding review occurred, you were there when the safeguarding failures that were the subject of the review occurred. Were you aware of any of those safeguarding failures?
Never.
the letter of June 2013 from the victim, you had nothing to do in answering that?
Nothing to do with my work at all.
Should you have been aware?
I think if there had been a major safeguarding issue within one of the 3 dioceses, which I was working with, which were Ripon and Leeds, Bradford and Wakefield, I would have been aware of it. But I was not aware of any such letter.
Safeguarding failures by your boss, that's something you shouldn't have been aware of?
My boss was the Archbishop of York at the time, but he had a huge amount of agenda that I was totally unaware of. I was only one small microcosm of his totality of his work.
So, reading the review, you've not reflected at all on what you might have done in that period?
All I can say to this committee is I was never aware of any issues of that nature during the time I worked with the Archbishop.
No, I'm asking you, should you have been, or should you have reflected on, once those failures were made public knowledge in the review, should you have reflected perhaps on whether in your role you should have been aware? Have you gone through that process? Have you thought about that?
What we did remember discussing was, as you brought 3 dioceses together, how the safeguarding issues of 3 separate organisations would be handled within one larger organisation. There was discussion of that, but nothing,
no,
I'm afraid.
I'm just asking whether you've reflected in the light of the review. But you're saying you haven't reflected in the light of the review. Okay, thank you. You've described the role as being perceived as something of a toothless tiger. How are you going to address, presumably you don't want it to be a toothless tiger, how are you going to address that perception?
I think that was the perception as of probably about a year ago, when there was quite a hiatus going on. I think things have stabilised to a degree now, and I think the current Chief Inspector has brought a degree of stability to it. But I certainly don't want to be a toothless tiger. I certainly want to issue reports which are accurate, evidence-based, have good recommendations that will bring around the results we all want: efficiency, effectiveness and consistency. Yes, I want them to be... I don't want them to be hard-hitting for the sake of being hard-hitting. I want them to be good in the sense of having good implementable recommendations that will make a difference at the end of the day. That's what I'm after.
Do you see yourself having a sort of media role in publicising what you're doing?
I think given the level of concern that I mentioned right at the outset about the public about immigration, for the Chief Inspector to have no, as it were, media-type presence or profile seems unusual. In the past, as I mentioned earlier, I have always, in all my roles where there's been a media element, tried to develop linkages with the media such that as and when, if things did go, as it were, wrong or there was an issue, one had an understanding of the media, how they worked and they of you, that I always found worked in your favour rather than if you were doing it with no such understanding. So yes, I would see the Chief Inspector needing to have some form of a media profile. Just what that is and how it manifests itself, I've yet to work through with the staff as to how we would do it.
You feel you have enough media experience to do that?
Oh yes, I've done that.
Okay. You're very accepting of the limits of the role, the fact that you can't publish. Your predecessor, but one, said there should be a review of the limits, there should be a push for the right to publish. Do you think there should be a review, or are you accepting of the limits of your role?
No, I would agree with my predecessor, but one who's sitting behind me at the moment. I think there are some anomalies with the Chief Inspector role as it's set up at the moment, and I think as I understand it, if the Windrush recommendations are being revisited, and there may be an intention to do some kind of review of the role and remit, I would welcome that, because I think there are areas which would need to be explored. What I've tried to articulate to this committee is what I see the framework, which it is at the moment, which is not necessarily the framework that might be the most appropriate framework moving forward. So I would welcome a review. I think it's probably timely, and that can look at all kinds of things, whether it's publishing reports, also size, resources, and other issues.
And you've not previously suggested that a review would detract from the work of the office?
Reviews, in my experience, can impact on an office, particularly when it's a very small office. And if you find a review is asking for loads of detail about how the office works, what it's done here, what it's done there, you find your staff are then chasing around trying to find data to feed the beast of the review rather than getting on with their work. That's been my experience in the past, and it is a risk.
And have you expressed that in consideration of a review here? Have you said it might detract from our work?
Well, I'm not in the role yet, so I can't, and I'm not in a position yet to influence but my understanding is a review is under consideration, and if I were in the role, then I would be saying, right, how are we going to do this in a way that has minimum impact on the core work of the staff within the inspectorate?
Have you suggested it might detract from the work? Have you suggested that?
No, because I haven't had those discussions yet with the Home Office.